Chapter 56. Haikatai. Haikatai traveled throughout the world with staff in hand, looking at the flow of energy, looking carefully to the signs of nature. She felt the shifting of the world and the energy within it. Magic was one of the many forms of life. It had many forms and shapes. Observing it would take more than a glance. She shifted herself to a state to observe the states of other worlds. She felt the far-reaching magics of the gods, the hunger of the void. She felt the call of the light, the panic in the world itself. It was seeming more that Meredith was right. Laredo Meredith, she knew, was not lying. She knew that much, but he still might be crazy. Some people truly believed madness so long as they could be convinced. His word alone was not enough to go on, but it was enough to look into it. As a goddess she had certain advantages. She had places she could look that mortals could not. Although as a lesser goddess she could not enter the domain of the gods completely, but she could still feel it. She could still observe the world. She could send magic to the very edges of the sky and feel the lingering loss of magic and the slowing flow of magic returning to it. It happened so slowly and slightly that it could barely be said to happen at all. The true question was not if it was happening, but how did Meredith learn of it? Mortals such as they did not have the means nor the resources to notice such a slight difference or know the long-term effects of it. No, she felt this was the work of another god, perhaps even one of the greater gods. She knew not who, nor could she know. Crafty as she was, all gods shared a certain degree of finesse. It was doubtful she could easily learn of the truth. But perhaps she was thinking of it wrong. She did not need to see the god. She needed only go to the mortals who learned of it. She needed to learn truly how they knew. Which god was responsible for this? She considered the void. She considered the fallen ones. She considered the burned remnants of an old one. The fires of creation, one of the few weapons that could be used to end the old ones. Helios, perhaps. He might not have been part of the design, but he most certainly was the one to end an elder god above the world. Haikatai knew often the old ones and the new gods were at war. But to use mortals as pieces, what were they worth, really? Even her grand coven posed little use against the grand scheme of things. Speaking of her coven, she had completely forgotten to feel the progress of it. She wondered if the humans of Xing would face against her coven. How many could they kill? She wondered. Half, maybe. She supposed it was due for a culling. The power of the dead witches adding to her own power. Although at the moment she wouldn't feel it. She was in a realm between, a place where her spirit was not a part of her body. It was imperative she took the time to feel the world and find the truth of things. All said, she found the truth. The world was indeed dying. What's more, the gods were just letting it happen. Even she had to admit that that was cold, even for them. But she supposed they were busy protecting something they deemed more important. Humans were so arrogant to think they were the only beings. Although it could be said all races were arrogant. Elves, dwarves, humans, it mattered not. Even witches and hags considered themselves the betters of all races. She was no different. She didn't just think she was above others. She knew it. But she supposed being a goddess might have an impact on that sort of thinking. In their arrogance they were blind to the coming darkness. The world would die. It was as Meredith said. She reconsidered the humans now, their true objective. If there were a selected few who knew the truth, those few, perhaps the 12 houses of Xing, were no doubt going to find the biggest offenders of magic usage and end them, witches being an obvious and clear choice to remove from their point of view. She considered the situation and supposed it might be fine to allow them to cull her coven, especially now after finding the truth. When she finally returned fully to her world, her body glowing with power without flaw or imperfection, she was a manifestation of beauty as expected of a goddess. She kept remnants of her old appearance as Claire, but instead of the padded armor and cloth she wore a revealing outfit slit down the sides and middle, dressed as a woman with intention to seduce or pose for the world to see. She wore it as bold as a lion and kept the traditional witch hat on her head. Her hair no longer short and her staff a rod with a great clear gem on the top. Surprisingly, her staff had relatively little decoration, but it was the very thing that made her a goddess over time. It allowed her to drain the power of witches, one after another. And now, with so many bound to her, in time even she would become a true goddess, not just a lesser one. Despite the fact she ascended beyond mortals, she often craved being one. She became bored of using her impressive power to easily solve all problems. She believed a witch should be crafty, and she wanted her mind sharp. To that end she disguised herself, and now she found herself missing it, wondering what she could have done differently to hide it. She knew of course what parts gave her away, but did not consider them a mistake. Hecate supposed she could have bewitched Meridus harder, and calmed him to such a degree where he would serve her without question. Without his weapon in her bed, she could have easily done so. But all the same it was against her nature. When she learned the truth, she realized the importance of looking into the state of the world. Half the reason she didn't wipe them out was it was imperative to look into the state of the world. Although it was also that she was impressed with the mortals. They, if necessary, could make allies one day. Although she doubted they'd see it this way, she was not their true enemy. She looked to her own interests, but even she did not want the world destroyed in this way. She toyed with her options. Siding with Xing? No, she would do no such thing. Continue running the coven? Yes, but even they may need to be disposed for the sake of the power she might need. The world was indeed dying after all. Perhaps more common enemies could be found, such as the Dark Elves. The Dark Elves had none of her love. She supposed she could aid them in destroying them, but in the end it would only be temporary. Perhaps there was another lesser god that needed to be destroyed. No, she was already an irritation to most gods. She didn't need a greater god smiting her where she stood. The god of dragons, elves, and the sun could be upon her, and that would be the end of it. The lesser gods would be the first to go for the sacrifice of the world. It would be better if she took her power and fled, but she would not sacrifice her entire coven. Indeed, she was in a situation where she was at a complete loss. Upon sensing the world, Hecate felt that perhaps 200 witches had died since the attack on Xing. So many! It seemed that Melumbra had fallen with Isidora and Norai. Many powerful witches had fallen, and she felt herself brimming with energy. She supposed she needed to simply collect the energy as her coven wept. They grew too numerous. She felt no offense with other covens spread out throughout the world, even when they cut themselves off from the Grand Coven. She couldn't allow it, but she had more respect for Isidora than the witches that stayed in the protection of the bog. It was a strange relationship. She pretended to favor her own coven, but in reality she was disgusted by the state of it. Despite her words to them and their sacrifices and praises, she cared for none of it. It was all a power grab. It seemed they forgot the craftiness of the witch. The humans easily killing them was proof enough to her that something about the coven needed to adapt. If she returned to them, she might prepare more traps than were non-magic. Though witches thrived on magic and rituals, it would not protect them. Not forever. It seemed the forces of Xing had relatively few casualties. She wondered why they gave up so easily. Were they not willing to make sacrifices? Then she considered their leader, Darius. After a moment of thought, she considered the obvious conclusion. He knew. He knew about the state of the world, and he arranged the slaughter. He even attacked early because he didn't fully put the faith in her when she was Claire. She did not like the man, but she supposed it did make sense that he was clever enough to have some sort of plan. Whatever he came there to do, perhaps it required killing Melumbra. Perhaps he needed some sort of artifact. Perhaps he was just simply greedy in stealing what he could pillage. No. His objective, she guessed, was to take out the main attack force of the Grand Coven, crippling them if they wanted to strike at Xing or other locations. It was simple. But without the attack force, whatever force they'd send against an army, yes, without that there would be no attack. He may not have killed her coven, but he did kill the first that would be picked to launch an assault upon the mortal cities. For now she waited. She watched. She ignored the cries of her Grand Coven and considered the state of the world, then caught herself wishing to be immortal again. Chapter 57. Plague's End. It wasn't often that men were relieved to finally stop seeing trees. Upon leaving the bog they began to see other landscapes. There was the Laughing Dragon Lake, which gained the name due to how it was shaped at bird's-eye view. They followed the road, making time enough to get back to Xing. They traveled past the lake in the far distance and towards the Williams Woods, the bog corruption stretching far throughout the worlds. Druids would have years of work by how far the bog stretched. The woods were becoming less cramped, and certainly less bugs and beasts of the bog. They traded bog waters with occasional streams, and ambience of croaks gradually switched to chirps of birds. They began to see signs of travelers and even signs of bandits that knew more than well enough to leave a war party to such size alone. Their time, of course, would come, but it was not their job. They were tired, and the militaries of the world returning to work in patrolling the woodlands around their homes was something that was going to happen, little by little. Although it had only been roughly 5 days since they were dispatched, they had much to travel, and being out of a bog was a relief. Some men wondered if they would have vengeance from the witches. Perhaps long-reaching curses might hit them and their families. Worry was common, but at least they were heading home. Many witches died, their main attack force crushed, and could they have really asked for more? It would have been possible to keep fighting, but at great cost. They were glad it ended. The journey a welcome change from constantly being on edge, although the promise that they would not be harassed in any way was certainly a gift that they would take. Never mind how far Darius went to get such a deal made. They made their way to the town of Kib, but it would be 3 days' travel to get there. From there, they could travel to Shing. The plan was to enter a town in the woods and use a massive sacred tree to return home. Messages were sent to Shing via magical means, and birds if they had any. Vigor returned to the men, and talks about the amazing things they did became common talk. Mina had to switch carts several times, healing those who were sick or injured, often taking priority to those who seemed to be suffering the most. Sven was very hurt. It was likely his work as a witch hunter was over. The jackal was now missing an arm and a decent portion of the shoulder. It was a miracle he was not dead. Important blood vessels and bones were in the shoulder, but the jackal lived, although it was unlikely he could make work as a witch hunter. Kenson stayed by his side as Augustana and Mina worked together to heal him. Bits of rotten flesh removed. Sven was tough and did not complain, despite the pain it would cause him. He hid it well, even though occasionally he bit down hard on a board. There were others injured, but for the most part they could be treated or cared for. The death toll was minimal, and Colonel Darius Urn lived up to his reputation as the Immortal. Although few talked of him due to the general agreement that he ran them like dogs and risked too much for too little. He and his black-bladed soldiers stayed in their own cart, meeting gazes of hate of those who felt they went way too far to the witches. There was a point where they had committed murder, but they seemed to feel no guilt. The argument was mostly an emotional one, and did not stand to those who easily found counter. It worked. They did it. They got a deal that would ensure their safety. Never mind how they did it. Good riddance to the witches that died. But the more lingering, unspoken truth was this: Darius would have done that to any of them. The 12 houses needed to know just how ruthless his methods were. How long before he became their enemy? Still, such talks were put to the side in exchange for revelry and beer that especially was picked up at a tavern. Scipio sat next to Meredith. "You're pretty good at finding women." The druid he rescued earlier may not have been able to talk, but made no effort to stop using him as a pillow. Often she hugged him in her sleep, or really when she was awake, giving off every sign of nature that she made claim to him. I'm not sure attracting a witch who used me to give her information really counts as finding women. Scipio smiled and leaned in. I wouldn't word it in that way. Not many men can say they betted a goddess. Surely there must be some right to brag about that. Meredith wasn't sure about that. Right now I like this one more. She doesn't talk much. Scipio noted the druid had an eye open, even though pretending to be asleep. A beauty, be sure, and the fact she doesn't speak would be considered a plus by most men. The druid, Iflana, stuck out a tongue at Scipio and continued resting on Meredith. Scipio looked to the distance. So what will you do now? Keep working for Darius? Meredith didn't know. I mean, I was planning on it, but I might just call it quits for now. I could use a rest. I need a vacation. Scipio agreed and looked up at the sky now. A lot has happened. Imagine how much we could get done in a few years. You think maybe in 1,000 years people might talk about what we did in some kind of a history class? Maybe they'll talk about Black Ma, or how we fought the Coven. You think people will name their kid Scipio? Laredo maybe? Or whatever her name is? Meredith looked to the sleeping druid and pat her hair a bit. Iflana is her name. Scipio noted it. Pretty. She looks pretty set on keeping you. Meredith shrugged. I don't mind. Who would? Iflana smirked a little as she pretended to sleep. It seemed she would have her way after all. He saved her life, but there were a myriad of reasons she intended to keep him close. Scipio looked to Augustana. She seems bothered. He wasn't wrong. The witch's curse took a toll on her. It lingered in her heart and mind, and she somehow knew it would haunt her. She felt at odds with her gods, but all the same prayed for protection. A witch's curse wasn't absolute, but often came true in some form or another, usually not even a way the witch could imagine. Those who you love will abandon you, or you will abandon them. He that you love, you will bury him. You will die in solitude. She would abandon those she loved, or they would abandon her? It only now seemed to occur to her how lasting the damage against witches would be. She wasn't the only one cursed, was she? Odds were someone else was cursed. How much had they lost? She at least partially understood why Darius was doing what he was doing. The witches would die and extend the life of the world. And it's true there were not many deaths. Just what was he planning? If anything, he should shout from the mountain tops the state of the world. Or perhaps he was only telling a select few. How did he get the cure? How did he get those weapons? It's time she approached him. At the next stop she came near and asked him about many things that were on her mind. How many have you told the state of the world? Darius answered, None, although I wanted to present it to the right people at the right time. We will need support and funding. Hiding it forever will be impossible without the cooperation of a select few in power. Those capable of keeping knowledge secret and handling sensitive matters are ideal. But I need a better way to present it. I need a plan to offer them, a blueprint that will show definite results. Augustana took advantage of the fact they had privacy, also making sure not to give any specifics. Was killing the witches a part of it? Some sort of a test? Darius looked away, but answered, Our actions resulted in the death of roughly 200 witches. Using this, we can get an estimate on what improvements on the situation at large might be, if there were a way to show demonstrated progress. Augustana understood a little more now. You're going to show how much of a difference it made. Use that as an example to get an idea on how much more is needed. It is sound reasoning to me, but what of the goddess? What if she intends to counterattack? Darius did not know. To be honest, she was not something that I could plan for. If she struck, I doubt any resources I could borrow or steal would be enough to face her. She is not something I wish to face. But if we were to face her, it would need to be by our choice, and we would need to set a proper stage. We would need every advantage. I'd need a lot of time to prepare if we were to face something like that. Augustana thought it'd be simply impossible. Would you ever ask us to face a god? Darius didn't know. It's not something I'd ever dream of asking, but this is a situation I never dreamed of. If it were possible or served a true purpose, yes, but I wouldn't ask you to do anything I myself was not standing beside you for. She smiled, but wanted to know something else. Darius, where did you get those weapons and armor? Were they given to you? Darius shook his head. I can't tell you how he made them. Not here, I'm sorry. I trust you, but I need a place of absolute secrecy. These were presented as anti-witch weapons, but they go far beyond that purpose. Still, I can't tell you yet how we have them. But know that if you intend to use one, it might interfere with your own power. She could feel it. It definitely was true. Even from that distance, it was as if magic was being pushed away and back to her. How Darius could stand it was beyond her. But she supposed he did not use magic. Something like that weapon must have been in development a long time. This was a prototype. It wasn't perfect, but it looked to her at the top to be some type of iron or steel. But the inside was definitely different. Darius, how did you get the cure? Darius was more comfortable saying this before her. Trial, error, and a miracle child. One who was given resources and had motivation to complete it. Augustana almost asked, then suppose this miracle child came up with more than just that cure. She looked to the armor and nodded. She must be quite capable. He nodded and looked her in the eye with purpose. The maker of the cure is quite capable. It will hardly be the first thing she makes that will be useful. She supposed that answer would have to do. Just what had Darius found? She thought about it and considered the observatory, the one that displayed images and proof the world was dying. Was that it? Was he using it to come up with inventions? No, surely not. She never saw anything like that, although she supposed that might be part of where he might be getting information. But it was not easy to get to, and there wouldn't be an easy way to send a message to the observatory. So she didn't see how he'd have a way to get much out of the observatory. He couldn't go constantly. So then was it really just the work of a child? Was he lying? No, she needed to calm down. He wasn't going to lie to her, but he simply couldn't tell her everything. There was no doubt more to tell, but they needed to go. She nodded and thought about if there was more to ask, and decided there was a chance that someone unknown mage or some little bird might be listening in. Even if they didn't think so, it was better not to risk it. Darius did whisper something in her ear. Will you come with me again to the observatory? We can speak there. Ask if Meredith and Scipio will join us. She agreed. Augustana slapped a fist against her chest and gave a quick bow, a sign that she would follow orders. She stepped away and made her way over to Meredith, spoke to him quietly before at last it was time to get a move on again. Darius did have one thing he wanted to do before it was too late. He approached Kenson, hoping to ask him about possible employment opportunities. Although in truth he was a witch hunter, so it was not like he already had standings. Still, with the situation with Claire and the Witchblades losing what was effectively their leader, the Witchblades might well have faced the brink of collapse in the near future, but they might also return with renewed strength now that the witches had been temporarily weakened. Darius didn't know the future, and in all likelihood the Witchblades would lose considering strength and influence after recent events. Militaries of the world returning to their homes to deal with new threats, forces like the Witchblades would be quickly picked up. Kenson, if I may have a word with you in private, Darius said before the carts began to make their journey. He supposed he could sit in a cart with Darius a little longer. This offer will extend to Sven when he is well enough to hear it, but you have proven your worth as many things. But I wanted to offer you employment for my company if the situation with the Witchblades should bode ill. The offer is there. Should you ever contact me, know you will have a place. I wanted to make that clear. Kenson understood, of course. The situation with the Witchblades could very well fall into dust. I had considered telling them that Claire died and leaving it at that. I would think it would be possible to tell them that for now, but... Darius shook his head. No, there are many who saw what happened unrelated to the Witchblades. News like that eventually spreads. They might be quiet now, but friends and loved ones will be told. Those who were told will tell others. That news is too much to blanket under a half-truth. They will eventually find out about Claire. When that happens, I wish your organization no ill will. However, if you are in need of employment, then it will be yours. Kenson nodded, considering Darius's offer. He had spent much of his time saying the word yes. It would be so easy to say it again. No, I believe I should continue hunting witches as I have always done. I will continue hunting the occult by my terms, no one else's. Darius could understand, he supposed. In any case, I do have a more temporary task for you if you are willing to hear it. Kenson listened. Is it something to do with the remaining witches, yes? In a sense, it was. He asked a harsh question. If the means and opportunity were available to you, would you kill Haikatai? Would you be able to, if it really came down to it? Kenson gave a quick nod. It would bring me no pleasure, but yes. I would be willing to kill her. Able is an entirely different matter. I would not take the chance unless there was a true way to kill her. As the goddess of witches, she would be a supreme target for all witch hunters. But even with all the Witchblades, even with the armies of Shang, I doubt we'd stand a chance. And who's to say she would not simply get away should we ever encounter her? She is not so limited as to be bound to a particular place. She can appear many places in the world. And killing witches only makes her stronger. Proof of this is that she allowed us to kill many witches. She could have stopped us, of course. There would have been little we could do to counter her. Darius agreed. One of the reasons we needed to attack then and there was because we could never get permission to attack the Brushbog directly. Too much would be fearful of a goddess's retribution. Kenson was curious, though. But she said she would let us attack her coven, yes? Of course, that was true. And we believed her, but hearing it second-hand from us, would anyone else believe the goddess of witches would stay her hand against an enemy entering her bog? Who would believe such a thing? Only those there would believe it. Kenson supposed it would be difficult to convince anyone, and it was better to ask forgiveness than permission. Darius was willing to take great risks. He was risking more than his life. Even in victory he was risking his career and reputation, although he didn't really see it in any real danger at this point. I don't disagree on any particular point, but what did you have in mind to face Haikatai? She won't go down easily with any force of any strength. Darius did not answer. If I came up with something, would you want to know? Kenson nodded. Yes, and if the plan proves stable, I will join you, even if it will likely cost my life. That is what must be done." Darius had to ask now. "Then I will speak to you when the time comes. You don't do this for money, do you?" "No, someone like you would get employment that paid better elsewhere. You fight for other reasons." Kenson could admit this much. "I have seen much of what witches do. I no longer fight for a particular nation. I fight for the entire realm. A dying position to fight for, I'm sure." Darius chuckled, realizing that they might actually be on the same side. Kenson was going to do well even if he did not work for Darius. He was sure someone like Kenson would keep hunting witches until the end of his days. And considering the world needed as many spellcasters to die as possible, and the harm the witches did, he did indeed fight for the realm. Darius need not hire him. He would continue on his work, although Darius supposed he should make another offer. "Before we leave Shing, let me give you a blade like this one. I'll see what we have. Consider it a parting gift. Allow me at least that much. Also, is there a way to contact you? I may need to speak with you another time." Kenson wouldn't say no. Even if he himself would have trouble using such a blade, he knew plenty could. It would be invaluable in his future hunts. "As for the contact, most forms of magic don't work well on me. Contact the Witchblades and I will answer. There are many ways to do so." Darius asked Kenson, "How soon will you return to the Witchblades?" Odd that he should ask. "I will wait until Sven is healed. I am sure there are places in Shing that will treat him. It will take some time. I can't imagine it happening so soon that we will be gone in a week. Even if I leave, Sven will likely stay. So anything you can do to help him, please do. Perhaps if not I, Sven might be willing to work for you. Even without an arm, I am sure he will hold his own." Darius supposed he could. He intended to ask Sven as well. But was there a way he could help him with his arm? He might start by asking Isla, and if worst came to worst, he could ask Alice. It wasn't just Sven he could help with something like that. Some sort of artificial limb, perhaps. It would not have to be perfect, but for someone like Sven he need not be crippled from being a great witch hunter. He looked back to Sven's cart. The tough jackal was biting down hard on a wooden plank as they continued to clean the infected flesh, not fighting back and holding as still as possible. Yes, Darius decided he would find some way to help him if he could. Should it be within his power to grant, he might find a way to help Sven. For now he waited silently and continued on the trip. The town of Kib was a ways away.